My name's Niall Mackay, and I've been the host of this podcast since 2019 when we started as A Saigon Podcast. We set out to share the stories of people that lived in Saigon because it's such a crazy, energetic city and there was so many interesting people here. As the podcast grew, we started to interview more and more people from across the world that all have a connection to and a love for Vietnam. So we hope if you're a regular listener, you've enjoyed these stories. And if you're new to the podcast, then enjoy this episode, which is from the archives while we take a break after season 7. If you are new, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you get notifications for new episodes, and check us out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and even TikTok. Enjoy this episode. Thanks for listening. Today, I'm excited to introduce the first ever guest on 7 Million Bikes. It's local comedian Mr. JK Hobson. He was a finalist in the 2018 Vietnam comedy competition, and he's known by many people here in Saigon because he's a man of many, many talents. One of which is people maybe aren't aware that he was in, as in MSNBC called it, a fairly well-known thrash metal band called Crisis back in the day.
And I had dreadlocks like at one point, like, you know, down to my waist or whatever, you know. And then, you know, we walk into a Denny's and it'd just be like, what's going on? People would get uncomfortable, man. We had somebody pull a gun on us once in a Denny's.
What?
You know?
And just because they didn't want you there.
Just didn't like the looks of us, and we're just like, we'll just fuck off. We're just eating pancakes.
Yeah. So we have lots of things to talk about today. And thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
How's it going?
It's going good.
Yeah, and so you're from New York originally, right?
Yeah, I was born in Puerto Rico.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was born there and then moved to New York with my parents when I was just 2 weeks short of being 2 years old. So I spent like the first almost 2 years of my life in San Juan. And then we moved to Brooklyn, New York. And I was raised in New York City like many Puerto Ricans.
And what was that like in New York City then? Growing up, as like a teenager, is there many open spaces in New York? Do you have parks, or is it as crazy as Saigon?
It's not quite as crazy as Saigon. Like growing up as a younger kid, I mean, it's funny when people ask you, what was it like growing up in New York City? Because I wasn't aware that I lived in New York City until I was about 9 or 10. And I remember my friend Angel, he was like, yo, we live in New York City, man. This is like, people want to be from here, yo. I was like, oh, I guess so. Like, I guess you'd watch movies and stuff. It seems to be a pretty important, because before that, you're just being a kid, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, we just run around the streets and, you know, just have fun. You know, this is the 70s, pre-internet, so just you could still do just wild shit, and it would never just...
There's nobody filming you at the time.
Right.
I feel so lucky that... So I'm 36, and we are almost the same age. We're a generation away from that, right? And I just can't imagine if I'd grown up in that era of being constantly filmed, social media. How do you deal with that? I don't know how young people do.
I don't know. I mean, I remember being neurotic as like in my, 20s, especially worried about what people thought about what I was doing. You know what I mean? Because when you're in your 20s, you still care what people think about stuff. You know what I mean? But imagine having that compounded by the fact that people are watching you all the time, posting stuff on social media. You feel pressure to post stuff on social media, and then you feel the need for people to respond a certain way, which, at this age, I mean, I understand that. And I, if I get a lot of likes on something, I'm like, all right, cool. I'll put a picture of my mom up for Mother's Day. She got a bunch of likes, good, or I posted a cool picture. But, like, my life doesn't depend on it,
Some people do, though.
Some people, it does. It matters a lot. And, and when you're really young and those are your formative years, like, I can't imagine, And then, of course, as everybody says, I'm glad I got a lot of dumb things out of the way before it gets saved for posterity forever.
I mean, it makes me almost cringe when I think of some of the dumb stuff I've done when I was young. Like, everyone has. I'm so glad there's not a record of that.
Yeah, right. You ain't got no World Star videos up there?
World Star?
WorldStar.com. Oh, man. World Star is a website that primarily focuses on, like, up-and-coming hip hop artists and people getting their ass kicked on camera. And there's the whole thing, like they have like, I mean, they post a lot of stuff on World Star, but World Star is kind of famous for like fight videos, right? And then inevitably somebody gets knocked out and the person filming it will actually yell in real time, World Star, like it's going up on World Star. So, you know.
This is the stuff I don't understand.
Yeah.
So I'll put that link in the notes for this episode, worldstar.com, is it?
Yeah.
And we'll have a look at that.
Just so you know, if you ever get in a fist fight and you get hit really hard and you hear somebody go, World Star, that's not good. It's not a good thing. That's all you got to know.
And so was it growing up, was it watching television and movies and you realized that everything's set in New York? And then you're like, whoa, we live here.
Yeah, kind of. You know, like when my friend said it that day, I remember we had from like first grade to fourth grade, I lived in Flushing, Queens, and we had this apartment on the 6th floor. We had a balcony and you could see the Manhattan skyline, even though it was quite far from Manhattan, but you could see like the World Trade
Center.
Center.
Hang out the bathroom window, something like that.
Well, it was a balcony, so it was like, you know what I mean? Like you could actually hang out there and stuff. We never did, but sometimes we did once in a while. And my friend Angel and I were out there. We were sitting at the skyline, and he said he was like a couple of years older than me. He was like, yeah, so yeah, I guess it must have been from movies or something like that, you know, that, you know, I saw people talk about it, but it wasn't, you know, it sort of hit me a little bit, but then you get older. And then it goes like full on, like you think you're in the center of the planet. You know what I mean? You think, like, why would you go anywhere else? You know, like most New Yorkers think New York is the center of the world. A lot of people do, I guess, you know, and some people never leave. But I was fortunate to have a bunch of experiences that took me out of there and, you know, like really to literally the other side of the planet, you know.
And so you were in a Crisis, which, as we've said, is a fairly well-known band.
Yeah.
And so tell me a bit about that. How did that come about and what happened with that?
You mean the story of why we're called a fairly well-known band?
No,
that's a funny story.
Go on and tell us that story then.
Okay, so in my early 20s, well, I started playing in bands when I was in high school. I played guitar. My first band, I played bass. And when I was in university, the first time I went to university, I was in a bunch of different bands, playing drums and guitar and singing, all kinds of stuff. And I was always like good at guitar, even though I was self-taught. And then at some point, I was singing and playing for this band and just always trying to start bands up. And then my best friend, Mike Dixon, he was a singer for a band called No Redeeming Social Value. One day he said to me, you're always trying to start bands. Why don't you just join an established band and then just, you know, rock out? And I was like, yeah, it's that easy. Just join an established band. Yeah, I'll just like walk in the door and I'm in Metallica, right?
And how old were you at this point?
At this point, I was about 26. And then I guess I started looking in the Village Voice, which was like a print newspaper that existed at the time. RIP, R.I.P. Village Voice. And I was looking in the Musicians Wanted section, and it was this ad. It said, band with influences including Black Sabbath, the Melvins, and Acid Bath seek second guitar player. I was like, well, that's right up my alley, man. Like, especially Sabbath and the Melvins. I was like, all right, bet. So I called up, and there was an answering machine, for those who remember answering machines. And the outgoing message was this woman's voice saying, leave all messages for Crisis. And I hung up because Crisis was one of my favorite bands in New York. I had been a fan of theirs.
You already knew them?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, I had met them before even a couple of times, but I was like a super, like, huge fan of theirs. Even that I would watch them play and just be like, wow, I wish I was in this band. I should be in this band. This is like, for a lot of reasons, you know, some of them are musical. And then so I hung up and then I got my shit together and then I called them back and left a message. And then went down to one of their shows and checked them out. It was at Coney Island High, for any New Yorkers listening who remember that. And they were so good. And I was like, oh, my God, if I don't get in this band, I would be so depressed, you know. And then met them afterwards and, you know, exchanged music that I had written with them and talked music with Afzal, who was the guitar player. So basically, they were a 4-piece, and they were looking for a second guitar player to make it a 5-piece. So they weren't replacing anybody. They were just adding a second guitar to the mix. So long story short, we hung out a bunch. went to the studio with them and played a couple of songs, learned some songs that they had given me, added some parts to them, and then I showed them that I had learned one of their kind of big songs called Mechanical Man from their third album. And they were like, oh, cool. And then, yeah, long story short, I got in the band and we started touring, like, I want to say not even 2 months later.
What were you doing for work at that point?
I was doing temp work. So I was doing data entry.
I've been there.
Yeah.
So destroyed.
Oh, man. I mean, the only thing that wasn't soul crushing about it was that it was a temp job. So, you know, like if you work for a corporation and you know, like that's it, repeat ad nauseum for like, you know, as long as you can, you know, imagine, that's depressing. But you're like, I'm a temp, you know what I mean? I'm going to be out of here, you know, so, you know, you don't have to get caught up in the politics. You just get in there, do your job and bounce. So I was doing that. I had been doing that for like maybe a year or so. And then, so the cool thing about that was that when we had a tour, I could just be like, oh, well, I'm not going to temp it this time. So I'd bounce out and, you know, we'd be gone for a couple of weeks and then come back and just, you know, be working again. Yeah.
And so you got to tour all of America?
Yeah, well, I mean, at that time, we just did the East Coast. We were touring up and down the East Coast, I guess, like, as far down as, like, Florida, you know, from New York, a lot of northeastern shows. I mean, the East Coast of the United States, the cities it's very dense. So the major cities are, like, not like Philly's, like, 2 hours away, you know, Jersey's, like, right over the bridge. There's, like, a lot of places to play on the East Coast. So we did a lot of East Coast shows. And then in 2000... we decided to move to LA because that's where the music industry was at. Like there were so many bands that were from New York, but then had to leave New York to get signed because for rock music, it was really happening in LA. New York was big for hip hop and New York's underground scene was killer. So many great underground bands that came out of New York, but I can name on one hand how many of them like really blew up, like Biohazard and Helmet. You know, there were a few bands, you know, Quicksand sort of did all right. But the bands that really broke through, like out of the underground, moved to LA to do it. Like White Zombie is a great example. You know, like White Zombie, I went to high school with the drummer Ivan, and they even played at my high school, you know. And I remember seeing them in New York and just being blown away. Oh my God, they were so good. Like, and they were playing that music. They were playing the music for their fourth record, which is the one where they really broke. They were playing that for years before they moved to Hollywood. And then they moved to Hollywood, and then next thing you know, they're on MTV and huge tours. You know, they just but you know, they always had something like really special about them that really set them apart from a lot of other New York bands, you know. And Crisis, we kind of felt like we did too, you know. And so we wanted to kind of break out of, you know, sort of the constraints of being in this like local scene, which is a great scene, but we wanted to take things to the next level. So we moved to LA.
And then what happened in LA? Did you take it to the next level?
We did. We went through a lot of changes first, but like, so when I got in the band, man, I've never really talked about this in an interview before because I've never done an interview like not in the context of being in the band. But basically, so this band, Crisis was like a heavy, like thrash, crusty, like Sabbathy, not really fast. And we had a female singer, insane, amazing singer, Karen Crisis. She always said she sounded like Bjork, Janis Joplin, and Linda Blair from The Exorcist rolled up into one. Like she could just flip it from just being really ethereal and atmospheric and really beautiful to just like screaming and guttural like growls and, you know, really insane.
Well, let's take a pause for a second and we'll play a little clip of Crisis. So what happened next then in LA?
So when I joined the band in New York, actually before we went to LA, they were working on a new record, but it was like really bluesy and really like not heavy, not the Crisis that I remember. So it was kind of weird. Like jumping in was like, okay, they were going kind of more in like a stoner rock kind of direction, which I liked a lot of that stuff, but it wasn't like the thing that I really wanted to do. But it was like, okay, like I believe in this band and I believe in, you know, I believe this is definitely better than what I was doing before. So we started writing songs kind of definitely in a more commercial kind of vein. And we moved to LA, like kind of thinking, as bands do, oh, we're going to kind of, dumb it down a little bit, because Crisis' music up until then had been somewhat like schizophrenic and crazy and just, very like not commercial, and sort of inaccessible, except to people who really understood it.
And who was driving that change in the music?
There was the other guitar player, Afzal, who was like really kind of, at that point, really the driving force behind that change. And yeah, and that even spilled over. He was married to Karen, or he became married. He married Karen actually a few years after we moved to LA, but they were together. And he even was sort of directing her to make some changes, which I think everybody had different degrees of comfort with, but anyway, at any rate, we moved to LA, and then, we're like in the Hollywood scene and hanging out with other bands and stuff like that, and different kinds of bands. And it was really interesting. It was really interesting, and schmoozing, and, Lenita Erickson from this band Vixen. It's like an old 80s, like glam metal, like all female kind of hair metal band. Was our manager. She's bringing Gene Simmons to our shows and like hanging out backstage with him, and going to parties in Malibu with him and Paul Stanley. And I remember being at this party in Malibu with just like all these Hollywood like rock stars and shit, but just also being like kind of standing in the corner like, oh, this isn't my scene, man, but I guess here we are. And ended up actually like talking to this other dude, and who was also kind of older cat, and we're just kind of like sitting back and just having drinks and like laughing at the whole thing. And then and it ended up being, oh God, what's his name again? How am I forgetting his name? Oh God, he played drums for Merciful Fate, and then was also the drummer for, I was like, dude, you look familiar, man. Are you have a band, right? He's like, yeah. I was like, what's the name of the band here? He's like, oh, Motorhead. And I'm like, Motorhead, get the fuck out of here, man. Oh God, what's his name again?
Mickey D.
Mickey D. There we go, Mickey D. And it's being like, holy shit, you're Mickey D, because he played for Merciful Fate and King Diamond, and then he was in Motorhead. And so anyway, that was all super cool but weird. Met Paul Stanley. I think he has the same, I don't know if I should say this. He obviously had work done, and he had like the same inability to change facial expressions that Cher had. You know what I mean? It's like you get so much. All right, what the doctor's like, what facial expression do you want forever, right? Because
you think you had like a book and they have to like choose one, like, yeah, I want that one, like just mildly startled.
Yeah, just like like always surprised. I always want to look surprised. So that was cool, except we couldn't get signed. Like the only deals that we were being offered, like we were in talks with a few, like kind of big Hollywood adjacent, like kinds. I won't name any names, but like, oh, this guy wrote a song for Madonna. You know what I mean? He wants to sign us. But then it was like development deals where they're like, oh, okay, well, we're going to, give you this much money, but then it's recoupable and you're going to have to use our studio. And then we're going to charge you this much for using ours. And it's like, oh, wow, you guys are, they're just...
They're not actually giving you money. They're giving you like studio time.
They're giving us the opportunity to take a lot of money from us.
Right.
You know what I mean? To give us money up front and then get it back in studio time and basically, be in the hole as a lot of artists are. So we didn't get offered any really good deals. And then we got like just frustrated.
I was going to say, so how was that coming from like thrash metal, making good music, and then suddenly you're in the Hollywood scene, and then you're getting the realities of the business side of it? Like, how did that feel seeing that?
Oh, it was hella gross sometimes, man. One time, this lawyer for this group, it was like a little small conglomerate. He took us out to have drinks at the Standard, and so, so this singer that we had, she was pretty tough, and so she didn't really suffer fools like very often, and we're out there at the Standard, and we're by poolside. He's buying drinks for us and schmoozing with us. Like, hey, he's like it was like something out of a book. Hey, we like you guys, that's what we brought you here, because you guys are real. You guys are from New York City. You're the real deal, right? And then he looks at her.
Assuming this guy's on a lot of coke.
He probably. I hope so.
Just do the description of it. Just imagine him.
He seemed like it, and I certainly hope he just wasn't naturally like that, right? But it's a total, that's a total LA, right? And then he looks at her, he says, yeah, you guys are the real deal. But first of all, first thing we gotta do, we gotta get you some tits. He says to her, and we're just like, why is this guy fucking serious? Whoa, but we all just kind of like, observed it, and she took it like a champ. But then we're just like, wow, this is really not our scene. So at a certain point, we just we said, all right, fuck this. We put all the brakes on, and we just kind of looked at each other like, all right, what are we going to do? Because we don't like the way this feels. Hey, how about this? How about we just make the record that we want to make? Fuck the dumb shit.
Were they already trying to influence the music that you were going to make? Like, were they saying, you can make a record with us, how we want it to be like?
Yeah. They were telling her what to sing about, They're like, not so much with the music, but with their voice. And, they were like a bit like, it's like, we like you, but we want to do this with you. You know what I mean? And by that time, we weren't kids. You know what I mean? At that point, like, this is like 2002. So I'm like 30 at that point. Like the other guitar players, like quite a bit older. So we were pretty solid in what we were into, what we wanted. So it just, it just didn't feel good. And then at a certain point, we said, fuck this. We're going to make the best record we can. And we learned a lot from that period, from like, we wrote so many songs and demoed so much stuff. We learned so much. And we said, you know what? Let's just take what we learned, but apply it to what we already know, what we're into, and make a heavy-ass record that's heavy and interesting, but melodic, like everything that we know. I mean, I think every album you do should be the culmination of everything that you've learned as a human being up until that moment. And that's what we did. And we self-financed it. We saved money. We got this guy, amazing producer, Billy Anderson. He's recorded with Kurt Cobain, the Melvins, Neurosis, like so many great bands. And he loved Crisis. And we're like, dude, come through and record our album. He came, give me a place to stay. Set up the studio time. Always wanted to record y'all, Came through. Yeah. And we spent a bunch of days at, was it Desert Sky Studios or Desert Room Studios or something in Orange County, California. Recorded 8 songs. What's this going to be for? We don't know. Started shopping that, got a deal like that.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we spent years trying to figure out what the industry wanted. Oh, we should do this, we should do this. And the minute we're just like, let's just do what we want.
So let's just do us.
Boom. And all of a sudden, record deal with a very cool underground label that's still around now, the End Records. They were in Salt Lake City, and now they're in Brooklyn and doing great. And we were like their first touring band. So they bought us a van, a trailer, gave us a lot of tour support. And we were just like, yo, if you sign us and give us support, we'll promote the hell out of this record on the road. So we did. We got a bunch of national tours. And then that's when we started, we had toured the States, like going across the States here and there. But that's when we started hitting like every state. So we toured 48 out of 50 states.
Oh,
only 2 states.
Can you name them? I'm just kidding.
The United States minus Alaska and Hawaii.
Right, it's all continental U.S. Wow.
Yeah.
So then, what's America like? Right, because I think everyone knows America from the movies, right?
Yeah.
I've been there, but I've only been in the East Coast, really. And then, so it's really diverse, America, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize that. Like, all these states, everyone, it's all really different. So what was that like? Was it an eye-opener? What did you see that you weren't expecting?
We'll be right back.
Join pilot and adventurer Fernando Pino as he takes you on journeys to discover exciting destinations across the UK and Europe. You'll fly with him to hidden gems and experience local culture, from bustling streets to serene hideaways and the best places to eat, sleep, and play. Travel Plans is more than a podcast. It's your ticket to exploring the world and its history with a friend. In this episode, we are flying to discover a beachside paradise perfect for the whole family. Discover golden sands, activities galore, and even free childcare so you get your own break too. Why am I still here?
Yeah, it was an eye opener because I grew up in New York City, you know what I mean? So it was like, and then I lived in LA after that, which is like once you start traveling the States, you realize that you're in a bubble.
It's not real America, right?
And that's why when Trump got elected, I was like, of course, because I was in those places, you know what I mean? Like I remember being in the South, you know what I mean? We you know, we would walk into a Denny's and it was like the record would skip. You know, people were like, because mind you, so Crisis is comprised of Karen Crisis, right? Short white girl with long dreadlocks almost down to her feet with tattoos, right?
I'm going to put a picture of Crisis on the notes.
Okay, cool. Zal, who's the other guitar player, he's from Pakistan. Jita, the bass player, is big Taiwanese dude, right? A bunch of different drummers, like each one a freak in their own right. And then me, right? And so when we're walking into...
Are you big dreads at the time? Right?
And I had dreadlocks like at one point, like, you know, down to my waist or whatever, you know? And then, you know, we walk into a Denny's and it'd be like, what's going on? People would get uncomfortable, man. We had somebody pull a gun on us once in a Denny's.
What?
You know?
And just because they didn't want you there.
Just didn't like the looks of us, and we're just like, we'll just fuck off. We're just eating pancakes.
Yeah.
So, no, this is where I'm from. You thought he pulls a gun out, you know? And we're like, well, what are you gonna say to that? What are you gonna, you know?
And did you leave?
No, he ended up leaving. I mean, eventually we left. You know,
well, not in that Denny's today. Still recording the podcast.
Yeah,
still. Yeah.
There's a rift in the space-time continuum. There's still a version of us out there still. Eventually we left, you know, but all that is to say, yeah, I mean, you know, not every place is like that. Some places that are, you know, that are quiet, rural, people are kind, and you know, there's all kinds of people, man, you know. But yeah, it was an eye opener. I experienced, you know, I just experienced different kinds of people that I never would have, you know, and that's for better, for worse, you know, just like, you know, people who lived in compounds and, you know, grew their own stuff, and, you know, artists in Detroit who lived in big abandoned warehouses and made black light paintings of bands who were coming through. You know, these guys are chemists in St. Charles, Louisiana, that are extracting the active ingredient from Robitussin that makes you trip and just giving it out to people, you know, including us. Just all kinds of folks, man. So that was really eye-opening. And, you know, I will say, and I think you probably agree, like, you don't really know who you are, or you know who you are a lot less, at least, if you don't leave the place where you're from and discover, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
You gotta have the total context of who you think you are taken away from you before you're like, okay, well, who am I in this very different situation? That's who you really are. You know?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So I'm from Glasgow, and if maybe people don't know, but Glasgow has a huge sectarian problem between Protestants and Catholics, which is linked to the soccer teams, Rangers and Celtic. And Rangers are the Protestant team, and Celtic are the Catholic kind of Irish team. They're very much got a lot of supporters in Ireland, even though they're a Scottish football team. And so growing up, I was a part of that. I was a Rangers fan. I'm not religious at all, but, you know, got all swept up in that just because you have to, really. And it wasn't until I left and moved away, and then I was like, oh, that's not cool. Like, that's not right. And then you 100% you grow as a person. I almost forget now because it was so long ago, and now I'm like, I am who I am, and I'm like, I can't believe who I was then. You know, just like we were saying earlier, I'm so glad people don't have videos and pictures of back in that time. Like, I've got some old pictures, you know, printed pictures in photo albums of myself back then, and yeah, it's embarrassing.
Were you a hooligan?
No, I wasn't a hooligan. I mean, if you can't see me right now, you can see I'm like about, what do you say? I'm about 50 kgs soaking wet. So I was never a hooligan, but there were hooligans around. And we went to some scary places. We went to Holland. That was quite scary. We were playing in Rotterdam, and we weren't allowed to go to Rotterdam. We had to hang out in Amsterdam and then be bussed into Rotterdam. And the police had to give us an escort to the stadium with people like throwing stuff at us. People would piss into cups and throw cups and coins and things like that. So definitely like around that. But I never saw anything like, never seen anyone get stabbed or anything like that. My dad's friend did get arrested at one game for punching a riot policeman in the back of the head, which is one of the dumbest things I've ever seen in my life. And funny story about that was, it was my first time going down to England with my dad to watch a game. And it was a heated game because we were playing a team from Ireland. And we had to play at a neutral venue. That's why we were playing in England. There's riot police everywhere. And my dad's friend, who's the nicest guy in the world, my dad's still best friends with him, for some reason only known to him, decided to punch a riot policeman in the back of the head. And I was behind him and I saw it happen. I was like shocked. And for a split second, he got like one step. I thought he'd gone away with it. But riot cops do, they all look out for each other. So within that one step, they all grabbed him, pinned him on the ground, the shield was on top of him. And my dad hadn't seen it and he ran over and my dad was like, leave him alone. He hasn't done anything. I was like, Dad. No, he did. And I remember the cop turned around to my dad. I was only 16 at the time. The cop turned around to my dad and he says, if you don't let go right now, you're going to be arrested and your son's going to be arrested as well. And my dad just picked me up and we walked away. And we had to call his wife and he spent the night in the cells. And so we got back to Scotland the next day. We got back to Glasgow and my mum and dad, they went together and I went back to my mum's house. She was like, how's the game? I saw all that stuff on TV. And I was like, oh yeah, no, it was all right. There was no trouble. She's like, well, what's this then? Put in the VCR. She'd recorded the news the night before. I had bleach blonde hair at the time, embarrassingly. And there was me and my dad trying to basically free the prisoner, my dad's friend, on national news. And she had it on VCR. I had to be like, yeah, my dad's friend, I won't say his name. He's still in England. He's in prison right now. Well, I guess what do you call it? Like, yeah, in the cells for the night. So he was fine. He got let out. It wasn't a big deal. But yeah, that was it. So I was around that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you change is basically the point, right? And as soon as I left, so I moved to America. I lived there for a while. And that was just the biggest wake-up call for me ever. It was just like, wow, there's a different way of doing things. You don't need to hate people who's good. Because I was brought up to hate Celtic, which in turn meant you hated Catholics. But I didn't hate them. And they didn't really hate us either. But that was just like this sporting tribalism that's really unique to Glasgow.
And then you moved to New York where they hate the Boston Celtics. You're like, what's going on? It's following me.
Yeah, exactly. So I spent some time in New York as well. What's some of the big changes that you've seen in New York since you last lived there?
Jesus. It's barely the place I remember. It's like super gentrified is like not even the word anymore. It's like a different place. They say that in about maybe in 30 years, the New York accent won't even exist there anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, that's like a projection, because it's just, it started, I want to say it started like in the late 90s. I used to hang out on the Lower East Side, which was like artistic community, just, a lot of artists, a lot of punk rock bands and squatters, and homeless people and junkies and just low income folks trying to get by, and I felt very comfortable there. I really dug it. It was like a place where you could be yourself and, everybody's just doing what they want. And there's like scenes and music and support and art and culture. And yeah, it's grimy, but that's.
So my question is then, do you think gentrification is a bad thing?
Of course it has. There's a good and a bad side to everything. It's like, well, you could say, well, gentrification's good because it cleans up the neighborhood, right? And then you have like opportunities and you have, like growth, economic growth, but for who? You know what I mean? Not for the people.
It's the inequality, which is always the problem, right? Yeah. Like worldwide right now. Yeah. Like the thing is, life is getting better for a lot of people,
right?
Especially in Vietnam, right? Like people are getting pulled out of poverty here. The rates are unbelievable.
Right.
The amount of people that have moved from poverty to not in poverty, but at the same time, there's this massive unequal gap between the rich and the poor, right?
Right.
And so you have this gentrification, and like you said, you were saying before, there's like squatters and junkies, and I think we romanticize it a bit because we think that that's amazing. Because I used to live in St Kilda in Melbourne, and that used to be like that, loads of junkies, and it was rough and edgy, and everyone romanticizes about that. And then you're like, yeah, but it wasn't safe. People were using drugs. There wasn't many jobs.
Right.
I think it's really easy. I think a lot of people, myself included, we sneer gentrification, but then when you think about it cleans the place up, people get more jobs. You know,
I definitely understand and agree with a lot of what you're saying. But what's different about Vietnam and New York is there's not the level of displacement in Vietnam. Because, I mean, all right, so you have people that are coming here and the economy is developing, but Vietnamese people are still, you know, a lot are still going to benefit from, you know, foreign investment and all kinds of things, right? But in places like in New York, for example, part of gentrification, like the first wave of gentrification, was police coming after people that looked like me. Right? I got arrested 3 times when I was in New York.
Wow.
Right? And neither time, and
was that during the time of the like search and frisk?
that was before stop and frisk.
Stop and frisk.
But it was while Giuliani was in office. Giuliani, who was one of Trump's lawyers until recently, and they were basically in certain neighborhoods. It wasn't even stop and frisk. They were ritually harassing people that looked like me. I got arrested 3 times. First 2 times, I didn't commit a crime. Third time, I did spit a piece of gum into a sewer grating, and the cops beat the shit out of me.
Wow.
Took me to jail, and then I still had to go to court for it. And when I went to court, they gave me a ticket for spitting, a $10 ticket, which I still haven't paid.
That
I might have
about $1,000 probably.
You know,
Next time you go back to America, they're going to be waiting for you.
yeah, probably. You know, but so the point is like when you say, well, there's a lot of benefit, but because you're not necessarily seeing what's happening to the people who are being displaced, the people that are being harassed. So yeah, I can't say there's not a benefit, but I think to say that, you know, it's easy to say the benefits outweigh the non-benefits when you're not looking at the people who are being displaced, who are being harassed.
Yeah, and I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, because you often just hear people go, gentrification, without really talking about it's safer now.
Right.
It's cleaner, it's nicer,
Yeah.
there's less junkies. But I think what you're saying about displacement is correct, right? Because those people have to have somewhere to go.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they just kind of get moved somewhere further away or somewhere with where they were originally living, which I think is the problem in New York right now, right?
Yeah, a lot of people.
In San Francisco too.
And some people, people that live in New York, you know, they're like, good, you know, New York should be a place for rich people. But then what happens is like, what's happening to the culture there? Like the things that people move to New York for often don't really exist anymore, you know? So, I could totally be romanticizing it. You know what I mean? I grew up in New York City in the 70s and 80s, and, you know, it was just so much life. And now it's kind of been replaced. It's sort of bland.
I definitely think you're right. I think it affects art, right? Like you're saying, like that grunginess, like that produces good art, and now it's bland, just like you said, right? So we have the safety and we have the Starbucks and the nicer coffee shops, and so it's nicer, but it's blander. So again, with these trade-offs, like, I know what's the solution, you know, because it's not going back.
Yeah.
It's only going to move forward. So where do we find how do people find new creative outlets, or where does that new art come from? Or is it just going to be all saccharine pop where everyone has to give in to the music companies like you didn't, and then just produce this bland pop that we have?
Which is happening anyways. Yeah. That's not just a New York thing, you know. I mean, if you just look at hip hop, before people knew you could make $1 gazillion doing it, you know, it's just, you know, or even rock music, you know, all kinds of forms of art and music, you know, before they become commercially viable, you're like, wow, it's raw, that's great. And then once you figure out, ooh, you know, well, I can auto-tune this, and, you know, and some people like that. That stuff, you know, that stuff kills, you know, it makes a lot of money. But I think the authenticity is really the thing that I miss. Not just New York, but a lot of things.
Yeah, and I think it's happening everywhere. Anywhere you go, like I said, I lived in Melbourne. That was happening there. St Kilda was really grungy, grimy. There's a lot of homeless people, a lot of drugs. But it was edgy and it was cool, and it was like cool dive bars, and that was before like I got there, but it was still kind of lingering. I was there for nearly 4 years, and I saw it progressively change but you're right, like, these people progressively got moved out, and I don't think there's any plans for where these people are going to go.
I don't think
you get priced out of it, and then it's like, well,
We're like, homeless people. Well, let me tell you something. Don't eat spam in New York. All right, I'll just tell you that right now. First thing,
I won't eat spam full stop. Explain why not in New York.
No, it's a joke. It's no, it's like, what do they do with these people? It's like, well, don't eat spam in New York.
Why? Wait, I don't get the joke.
Oh, it's just terrible, man. No, it's, if I have to explain it, it's
no, because the neighborhood I lived in Glasgow was called Spam Valley.
Okay.
And it was because the people that moved there, we moved to the burbs from the inner suburbs.
Yeah.
And my mum and dad, like lots of people, took on a mortgage that they couldn't afford.
Yeah.
But they got to move me to a nice suburb area with parks and clean spaces and a good school. So I'll always be grateful for that.
Yeah.
But then we had very little money.
Yeah.
To the point where, bills didn't get paid. We always had food on the table, but like bills didn't get paid, things like that. And so I didn't find this out till years later. Bishop Briggs got known as Spam Valley because it wasn't just our family. It was lots of other families moved there with the idealization of moving to the suburbs, but not actually being able to afford it. Yeah. So the theory was everyone was eating spam.
Right.
Because that was all they could afford.
Yeah.
And when I heard that, I was like, I mean, we weren't eating spam, but I was like, yeah, that makes complete sense.
I ate spam as a kid. That, man, you like, so kind of a little bit burnt, like with some pancakes, something like that, put it in the syrup. Ooh, it's big in the Philippines too. Like, it's like spam and on rice.
I think.
Is it? Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't advise it.
So what's the phrase though? Regarding New York,
which I've been about to say.
Don't eat.
I just made that. I mean, that's something I used to say when I was a kid. Because, all right, so when I was younger, like, this is pre-comedy, and I do have a joke now that sort of resembles this one. But I remember there used to be so many homeless people, and then at some point they were just like disappearing. And you're like, what? And especially, after I moved to LA and I would go back to visit, and I would go back to my old stomping grounds, like, where are the homeless people? People would ask that. I was like, I don't know, but I wouldn't be eating spam anymore. Now you get it. Now you get it. Yeah. Soil and greeny kind of. So which is like, which is very much like the joke that I wrote that is why I started doing comedy like this time around, which you probably heard a million times. The one.
Go on.
It was about so way fast forward from where we were at, but I was finishing university at the University of California, Riverside, and a friend of mine, Carol, she was putting together a stand-up comedy show, and she thought that I was funny and that I should do it. And I had done stand-up once before for an anthropology class, long story. But I decided to do it because I had this thing that I was telling people, like in person, like just talking shit at bars and at school and stuff, that I thought was really funny, but people found it horrifying. Which is that this is 2016, like spring, summer 2016. No, like 2015, 2016. And, Trump is running for office. And so the joke is this, and I still tell it, is like, everybody talks about Trump. He's racist, he's misogynist, he's xenophobic, he's Nazi, all this shit. But he's just one person, and one person cannot tear a country apart. If Trump was the only person who felt the way that he did, he would just be an idiot screaming in the wind, right? But the problem is not Trump. The problem is that his hateful rhetoric resonates with so many people.
A lot of people love keeping that quiet, right? And then someone's like, oh, I can see this now.
Right. So on the one hand, I'm thinking, okay, because if you even get rid of these people, if you get rid of Trump, these people are still going to be there. So on the one hand, I'm thinking, all right, even if we get rid of Trump, what are we going to do with all these people? And the other hand, I'm thinking, why do we waste perfectly good livestock to make dog food?
There's a solution.
Some people call it mass extermination. I call it efficiency. So I would say this to people, that people would be completely horrified. So I decided to do stand-up and tell it on stage, so that people might think that I was joking.
Well, let's get into that in a second. So we're going to do 2 parts. We're going to wrap up part 1 right now. And so just tell us, so what then happened with Crisis? We'll go back to that. Okay. So you had your album, you were touring. Obviously, you're not still touring and not still together. So what happened there?
So we came out with the record, made videos. We're on Headbangers Ball and all these like video shows and touring and opening up for bands that I grew up listening to. We did a tour with Soulfly. It was Max, the original singer for Sepultura, Brazilian, like amazing Brazilian metal band. Toured with MOD and Exodus, one of the biggest thrash bands of all time. Like, you have the big four, Metallica, Anthrax, Megadeth, and Slayer. If there was a fifth band added to that, it would have been Exodus. And we opened for them. And then in late 2005, after we got off the Exodus tour, the singer and guitar player split up like a couple of days after we got off tour. Like, it was literally like...
Don't marry a bandmates.
Man, And yeah, it was rough, man.
And so it was because of that, them splitting.
Yeah, they split up, and the band the band definitely couldn't go on. We couldn't replace her, and the nature, I don't want to get into the nature of the breakup is quite personal. So, I don't want to talk about their stuff, but it was basically, we were at an impasse, or an impasse. How do you pronounce that word? I always read it.
Either one's good.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that must be awkward. You can't have the creative hub nexus, right, of the band, and then they're not.
I mean, we all, she definitely didn't write the music. Like, the musicians, we all wrote the music. But she definitely, her vocals, we really stood apart because of that. If you play some of the music.
Can't get Adam Lambert to replace her.
Yeah, I don't think so. And, it's hard to replace singer. Like, how many bands can you name that have successfully replaced singers? You got AC/DC.
I didn't even know they'd replaced those singers. That's pretty bad.
Shout out to Bon Scott. Yeah. They had a different singer in the beginning.
And so then what? So what year was that? Then you just finally had to call it a day?
That was the end of 2005.
2005. So we'll call it a day for part one on that, because I literally think we could talk forever about this, and there's so much more I want to ask you. So maybe we'll have to talk about this more in a future episode. We'll take a break right now, and then we're going to go on to talking about Saigon and Vietnam, because this is 7 Million Bikes, a Saigon podcast, and we've not even got on to Vietnam yet, but this is supremely interesting. So we'll have a quick break, and if you're still interested to hear more from JK Hobson, then tune in for episode 2, and when we'll start to talk about his time in Vietnam. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of 7 Million Bikes, a Vietnam podcast. We hope you enjoy hearing our guest stories. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to the show and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Thank you so much to our producer, Lewis Wright, for making sure the show sounds as good as possible for you. And also a big thanks to the 7 Million Bikes community members and everyone who supports us. Don't forget, if you haven't already, you can join the community today. The link is in the description, and you'll get free event tickets, free 7 Million Bikes face mask, and invites to special member events. Also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and I'm still ashamed to say this, TikTok. Most of all, if you can, please donate to Saigon Children's Charity or Blue Dragons Children Foundation's COVID Appeals. Remember, we have 6 seasons of stories to share with you, so check them out if you haven't already, and we hope you can listen to future episodes too, so you can laugh, connect, and discover. Cheers! Have you thought about starting your own podcast but don't know where to begin or have the time? 7 Million Bikes can help you with this. A Vietnam podcast has just published its 150th episode and is on the verge of passing 25,000 downloads. That puts us in the top 10% of podcasts in the world. Because of the quality and consistency of our show, we are now producing and supporting other businesses to make their own podcasts, such as DT4IR and Strategy, Delta MV, and Autonomous. We also support independent podcasters here in Saigon and around the world with advice, tips, and tricks to make their shows successful too. If you want to start your own show but don't know where to begin, check out our latest free blog post with our 10 tips to start your own podcast. The link is in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're like me, you may use your laptop at places where you have to use public Wi-Fi. This opens you up to digital snoopers. It's a massive problem. It can be your internet service provider, or you know who, looking at what you do online, or a cyber criminal trying to steal your bank passwords or credit card info, or even a hacker at the next table trying to steal your sensitive data. These days, it is vital that you keep your data safe. NordVPN keeps all of these snoopers away. It makes your internet activity private, protects you from accessing dangerous websites that are phishing for your data, and lets you enjoy your favorite content securely, even while away from home. And it's easy to use, even I could use it. I've actually been using NordVPN for years now here in Vietnam, and I'm excited to be an affiliate partner with them. I've used NordVPN to watch Netflix, BBC, Disney Plus with ease, and I also know that my information and data are safe from prying eyes, whoever they may be. Join now and you'll get 68% off and 3 months free when you go to my link, nordvpn.com/SMB. Just again, for those hard of hearing, nordvpn.com/SMB. The link is also in the show notes. I know nobody checks them out, but go check that out and you can get the link from wherever you're listening to this podcast. As an affiliate partner, it also means that I will get a small commission when you sign up, but at no extra cost to you. So not only will you be getting a great deal through 7 Million Bikes, you get a great VPN and you'll be supporting 7 Million Bikes podcast. Stay safe online and enjoy the shows you love. Any questions, just let me know. You know how to get in touch with me. And thanks for listening to this show. Cheers.